Sonic, the heart of your system.
Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and this absolute monster of a laptop beside me is MSI's GT76 Titan DT9SG. So if it looks a little bit familiar, that's actually because Leo has already done 2 previews of this machine, one just before Computex, and then he did another one last month with Natalie from MSI, but now the final product has actually come to me for review. If you've already seen this laptop, you probably know it's most noteworthy for one main feature, and that is the fact that it actually packs in a desktop Core i9 9900K into its chassis. So as you can expect, that means the laptop itself is actually rather large. It weighs in at 4.2 kilos and it receives power from these dual 330 watt power bricks here, which are absolutely massive, and they even have to connect with their own little dedicated interface. So practicality is probably not really going to be high on your list of priorities if you are considering this machine. On top of that, alongside the Core i9 9900K, the other core spec includes an RTX 2080 Max-P graphics card. We also have 64 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, which is running at 2666 megahertz. And alongside that, there is 1 terabyte of SSD storage, and that is actually coming in the form of 2 Samsung PM981 SSDs running in RAID 0. Alongside that, there is also a 1 terabyte 7200 RPM hard drive, a 90 watt hour battery, and the display is a 17.3 inch 4K 60 panel. That is clearly some serious hardware inside this chassis, so as you can expect, pricing is very high. This machine, the GT76, is going to cost you £4,500. It's usually at this point in the review that I will go through the build quality, all the different features, the keyboard and trackpad and so on. But the first thing I really want to focus on here is performance, just because this is just, you know, it's just a different tier of laptop to what we're used to seeing. Obviously with the Core i9 9900K, which I cannot stress enough, that is the desktop 8-core part, which, you know, we're used to seeing overclocked to 5.1, that kind of range. In this laptop, MSI is very keen to stress you can run the 9900K at 5 GHz across all cores. That was kind of like the big point they were making in both of the previews that Leo already did. So obviously that is the first thing I really want to test, and I'll actually cut right to the chase. MSI is correct, you can run the 9900K at 5 GHz across all 8 cores. But kind of the caveat is, I found in my experience, you can do that while gaming, but in other kind of CPU intensive workloads, the CPU cannot maintain that frequency and it will throttle back. Starting with gaming though, this is obviously going to be slightly less intensive for the CPU, and without fail, across all the games I tested, I was seeing 5 GHz on all cores with the 9900K. In those games, I think CPU utilization hovered between 30 and 50%. The most I ever saw was, I think, 55% in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, so it's not being stressed that much, but still, 5 GHz across all cores without fail in a laptop, we'll touch on that later, but it's still incredibly impressive that we're just simply seeing these frequencies in a machine that you can actually pick up and carry around with you. So that was really the CPU while gaming. 5 GHz was absolutely not a problem, which, like I said, is very impressive. But when we move over to kind of CPU intensive workloads, the kind of things like you'd be doing with video editing, maybe if you want this laptop for some CAD or similar. So like I did my testing to stress the CPU using Cinebench, and if we started a run with the CPU set to 5 GHz, it would probably hold that frequency for maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15 at a push, before it would really quickly start to throttle back. And in actual fact, after that 10-15 second introduction period, the CPU cores would actually drop back between 4.4 and 4.6 GHz. So no, it can't hold 5 GHz across all cores in a CPU intensive workload, but I have to be honest and say I probably wasn't expecting it to do that. Even 5 GHz across all cores while gaming, I think, is pretty impressive. I would say though, even if it's not being able to hit that 5 GHz mark in those CPU intensive workloads, still 4.4 GHz for a 9900K in a laptop is still very, very fast, and the Cinebench results we saw from this machine are absolutely insane. Like, it was performing basically the same as we would expect from a proper 9900K in a proper desktop with liquid cooling, scoring I think it was around the 4,800 point mark for the multi-core run. Speaking of our Cinebench scores, I actually found something quite interesting, that if you ran the test with the CPU actually clocked in at 4.8 GHz across all cores, we were getting a higher final score than with the CPU set to 5 GHz. And the reason for this is, like we said, if we ran the test with the CPU at 5 GHz, the frequency does throttle back pretty quickly. But if we ran the test with the CPU set at 4.8 GHz, it's actually able to maintain that frequency for a lot longer. Probably almost about half the duration of the Cinebench R20 run, it was able to hold those cores at 4.8 GHz. Yes, it did actually eventually still throttle back to around that 4.4, 4.5 GHz mark. So, you know, you're not going to be able to run the CPU that fast, or I still think, like I said, 4.4 GHz is impressive. But simply the fact that it was running at 4.8 GHz for a lot longer, whereas when the CPU was set to 5 GHz, it did throttle back very quickly. We actually saw higher CPU scores and higher CPU performance with the CPU when the target frequency was 4.8 GHz instead of 5 GHz. So even when taking into account that the fact the CPU isn't going to be running at 5 GHz all the time across all cores when stressed in CPU intensive workloads, even the fact that it can run at 4.4, 4.5 GHz is immensely good for a laptop like this. Like, just being able to get that kind of performance into a laptop is fantastic, and accordingly we saw just excellent results, like we said, in our Cinebench runs, and also we ran PC Mark 10 just to give you kind of a general idea of how this machine stacks up. And 4.4 GHz in a 9900K in a laptop. I know I've said this a few times, but I think we kind of really do need to appreciate this is a desktop part, a very power hungry desktop part in a laptop, and it's running that fast. So for me, that is definitely a really impressive thing. Like we said though, if you do want to see the CPU at 5 GHz, you are going to have to do some gaming, and we've also got the RTX 2080, which is going to push a lot of frames, especially at 1080p. So for our games testing, we did actually test at both 1080p and 4K, just so you can kind of get an idea of the difference in frame rates you're going to get. So at 1080p across all 5 games we tested, we were averaging at least 100 FPS in every single title with this machine. So that is obviously very impressive. If you're going to be playing some older games as well, or some esports titles like Rocket League, Apex Legends, whatever, it's obviously going to be, the frame rates are going to be even higher. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this at the end of the video, but there is actually a 1080p 240Hz panel option for the GT76. So for pure gaming, that probably makes the most sense. If you do want to play at the full native resolution at 4K for this laptop, that is still doable. You are going to be typically seeing frame rates, I think it was around the 50 FPS mark based on our testing, although we did see some minimums down as low into the, I think it was 35 FPS in Deus Ex Mankind Divided. Ghost Recon Wildlands, we also saw a minimum around 40 FPS. So it is definitely doable, but like I said, if you do want to use this machine purely for gaming, you are going to get a smoother experience with one of those 1080p 240Hz panels. So clearly, I think you probably didn't need long to figure out that this machine is an absolute beast in terms of its overall performance. That 9900K, which can hit 5 GHz in games, paired with an RTX 2080, it is clearly no slouch. To go alongside that, obviously MSI has had to include an absolute mammoth cooling solution, so there's actually 11 copper heat pipes in this machine, but we're going to look at that in a bit more detail a little bit later on. But to talk about our temperature testing now, starting with the CPU, like we said, 5 GHz across all cores while gaming actually resulted in a peak temperature of 87 degrees while playing Battlefield 5 for half an hour. So that is definitely warm. It's getting into that kind of toasty region, but it's still, you know, a good 13 degrees away from TJ Maxx, so we were not within throttling territory here. If we move on to stress the CPU in IDA 64, pinging it at 100% for the whole test. Starting at 5 GHz, like we said, the core frequency does throttle back very quickly. It hit that 99 degree mark, throttled back to around 4.4 GHz, 4.5 GHz across the rest of the cores. And there it spent the remainder of the test running about the 90 degree mark. So obviously it can't hold 5 GHz for that long when it is under intense load on the CPU, but even so, 4.4, 4.5 GHz at around the 90-degree mark, I think is respectable considering what this machine is all about. As for our RTX 2080, we actually saw this chip peak at 87 degrees both in our gaming tests and also when being stressed with repeated runs of 3D Mark Firestrike Ultra. The only real difference being that in those gaming tests, which was Battlefield 5, we did see the core frequency of that GPU around 50 MHz higher than when the chip was being stressed in 3D Mark. Both frequencies, those were still well above the base clock of the GPU, which is 1575 MHz, so we were nowhere near thermal throttling. So as a follow-up to our temperature testing, we did already mention the kind of mammoth cooling solution MSI has used to keep the GPU and CPU temperatures in check. But fan speed is obviously a very big factor as well as to how they've managed to get the hardware in this system, run it as fast as it has, and keep it as cool as it has. So simply put, this machine is by far and away the loudest laptop I have ever heard. I actually measured 60 decibels on our sound meter with the CPU and GPU under 100% load, so just absolutely bonkers. There is actually a fan boost button I'm going to press now just to give you an idea of the fan speed. I'm absolutely positive you'll be able to pick it up just on my mic. So here goes. It'll take a second. You'll start hearing it. Okay, it's loud. It's going to get louder in a little bit. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Yep. Nice. So, yeah, it is ridiculously loud. 60 decibels. You can hear it almost as soon as it goes under load. The fans get very, very loud. I think, I'm going to be honest here, guys, I don't necessarily think it's the biggest drawback in the world. It is very annoying, but I think if you're buying a laptop that has a 9900K in it, which can overclock to 5 GHz across all cores, I think, you know, nobody was ever expecting this to be quiet. So if you are the kind of person who wants to buy a machine like this, you're probably just going to put headphones on anyway, so it's maybe not the biggest deal in the world, but certainly it is very, very loud. Following on from that, we're also going to look at our power draw. So like we said, two 330 watt power bricks which work in tandem, and while gaming we actually saw this laptop, the GT76, pull almost 390 watts across both of our power bricks. When we ramped it up with IDA 64, stressing the CPU and GPU to 100%, power draw came in at just under 420 watts. So clearly, you know, putting this hardware in a laptop like this is never going to result in kind of like a power efficient laptop. So clearly the two 330 watt power bricks are definitely required for the GT76. Obviously that does have serious implications for battery life, and again I have to say my expectations for battery life of this laptop were absolutely rock bottom. That is pretty much what we got. So we did two different tests, one in the eco profile and then one in the comfort profile, which does have slightly high clocks. And we got between 44 minutes and 64 minutes, so just over an hour in our PC Mark stress test. So really, you know, as expected, battery life is just terrible. I think that was always what we were going to get with a laptop like this. And realistically, if you are buying this machine, you're probably going to have it plugged into the mains anyway, pretty much all the time. So it's not great, but again, it's probably not really going to be a factor if you're the kind of person who wants to buy this machine. Right, so we're now going to move on to kind of just looking at the laptop itself, the tour of the components, all the stuff I usually do at the beginning, but I wanted to focus on performance first. So starting with the overall aesthetic, MSI's gone with this kind of silver and black color scheme, so it's pretty color neutral, and I have to say, while it's certainly not going to just, it doesn't look like a Lenovo ThinkPad or something, as in it doesn't look especially plain. It doesn't have the same kind of all-out gamer flair of like red accents, massive angled sections, all, you know, like aggressive styling. It has a little bit of that kind of around the vents at the back, but generally I think it looks pretty good, and I do like the fact that it's kind of this more silver look instead of MSI's classic black and red. Speaking of the silver lid, this is actually made from metal, so is the inside area of the keyboard deck. And it does, yeah, it does feel pretty solid overall. I did notice just a little bit of flexing kind of around the power button at the front of the laptop, so if you give that a good push to start on the system, you will feel that kind of deck flex a little bit underneath you, but by and large, this is a very solidly built laptop, I think mostly because of its thickness. As for the display now, like we said at the beginning of the video, this is a 17.3 inch 4K 60 panel. Unfortunately, MSI has encountered a bug with its true color software. That's where you can kind of pick if you want, you know, the gamer color profile, you want sRGB, you want movie, that kind of thing. So we weren't actually able to run our usual color test with our Spider colorimeter, simply because MSI said actually the software at the moment needs an update. So MSI does claim 100% Adobe RGB coverage with this laptop, but like I said, I just wasn't able to confirm that. Subjectively speaking though, it is an absolutely fantastic display, and I have to say I would not be surprised at all if that 100% Adobe RGB claim is accurate. It's just simply got absolutely, you know, lovely and vibrant colors. The contrast level is also excellent. It gets actually surprisingly bright for a laptop. The last couple of laptops I looked kind of peaked around the 250 nit range, so not that bright, but this was actually getting very pleasantly bright, and I was able to use it, you know, kind of in a well-lit room with the windows wide open, all that kind of stuff. So for just on kind of subjective terms, it is an absolutely lovely display. Just under that, obviously, we have the keyboard. This is another venture with SteelSeries, so you've got the kind of SteelSeries per key RGB lighting. It's not a mechanical keyboard though anymore, it's one of those chiclet style ones. I have to say, it's probably actually one of the better feeling keyboards I've used on a laptop. Like I said, not mechanical, but there is still a very nice kind of tactile feedback to each key press, which does feel very satisfying, works very well in games. My main issue with the keyboard actually is just the general layout. I found it to be a bit odd. Particularly things like the half-eye enter key. There's also a double-length left shift key. These are things we'd often, you know, more usually associate with a US layout, but this is a UK model, so not ideal. The main thing though, I honestly found just to be the hardest thing to get used to was the fact that the Windows key is on the right-hand side of the space bar. That for me just kind of, every time I was trying to find a setting or I was trying to open Paint or whatever it was, Windows key on the wrong side, almost always I was going to where it usually is on the left-hand side. So, like I said, the actual feeling of the keyboard is good. I just think the layout probably could be tweaked, could be a bit more improved, especially for UK users. I had no issues with the trackpad though, and general tracking, aside from the fact that maybe it could be a little bit bigger. But the actual trackpad itself, you know, no issues with general tracking, feels nice and smooth under my fingers. I also had no issues using multi-finger gestures. It also has discrete buttons, which actually are surprisingly nice and crisp. Probably one of the best buttons I've used on a mobile trackpad. I would say probably, as this is kind of more of a desktop replacement system, 95% of the time you're probably going to be using it with a mouse, because I'd imagine if you buy this, you're probably just going to put it on a desk and leave it there. So making a mouse, you know, using a mouse makes more sense. But if you do need to use the trackpad, it is actually pretty decent. Moving on now to talk about I/O. Just as the fans are deciding to ramp up again, we'll start on the left-hand side. And here we have the power input. It's the proprietary kind of dual interface from both power bricks. So we have power in, we also have Ethernet, there's a Thunderbolt 3 port, and then two USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type A ports, as well as audio and mic jack. So pretty stacked on the left hand side. Moving over to the right hand side of the laptop, things are again very busy. We have both an HDMI and mini DisplayPort output. There's a Type C USB 3.1 Gen 2, as well as another two Type A ports, and then we also get a final micro SD card reader. By and large, I have to say the I/O is absolutely fantastic. You get a lot of options, a lot of full-size Type A ports as well. The one thing that really sticks with me kind of just is that micro SD. I just cannot get my head around why in a laptop of this size, why is there no full-size SD card reader? I do not understand. To me, that seems probably almost bonkers, to be honest, just because if you're kind of the creative who wants to use this, you're doing video editing or whatever it might be, you're probably going to be putting in an SD card reader pretty often. So why it's micro SD instead of full size, I just do not know. The last area to look at is the underside of the chassis. When we take the bottom panel off, we'll obviously get a look at the internals. So the first thing to note is that pretty small 90 watt hour battery, which is situated at the bottom, and just to the left of that there is a 2.5 inch hard drive bay, which, like we said, is occupied with a 1 terabyte drive. Over in the bottom right hand corner though, just underneath this small metal plate, we actually find where our SSDs are. There's a total of 3 M.2 slots here, and 2 of those are occupied by 512GB Samsung PM981 SSDs, which is kind of the OEM equivalent of the 970 EVO. So these are actually configured together in RAID 0, and that gives total performance around 3 GB per second for both read and writes, which is definitely an improvement for the writes, so definitely nothing to complain about there. And there is actually a spare slot as well, so if you do want to just stick in another 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of SSD storage, you can do that with the spare M.2 slot. The last thing to point out now is that while the GT76 does actually come with 64GB of DDR4 memory as standard, there are actually a spare 2 SODIMM slots, so it would be very easy to upgrade this to 128GB if you are the kind of person who wants a mobile workstation with that much memory. So then, that is pretty much it for our look at MSI's GT76 Titan DT9SG. It's probably the kind of laptop you just run out of superlatives to describe it. It's just an absolute performance monster with that 9900K that can run at 5 GHz across all cores when gaming, and even when it's being stressed to the max in CPU intensive workloads, even the fact that it can run at 4.5 GHz across all cores in a laptop, I think is just kind of crazy. It's absolutely mind-bogglingly impressive. So MSI has just push the boundaries with what you can get from a mobile system with the GT76. I think it's pretty obvious that if you are just kind of looking for a simple gaming laptop, the GT76 is just way overkill. Like, you do not necessarily need a 9900K in a laptop if you just want to play some games. The actual spec down from this system, if you still want the RTX 2080, you can actually get the GT76 with the mobile i7-9750H, which is a 6-core CPU, and that also comes with a 1080p 240Hz panel. So in my opinion, if you are just a gamer who still wants, like a crazy powerful gaming laptop, that is going to give you a much better gaming experience with the high refresh rate, and you actually save £900 versus this model here. The particular spec of the GT76 I have though is the one with the 4K 60 panel, and like we said, that 9900K. So to my mind, that combination of hardware really makes this laptop potentially more of a mobile workstation than anything else. Obviously, you're still probably going to want to do some gaming on it, which you can do at 4K with the 2080, but definitely the 4K panel, 8-core desktop CPU, I think you're definitely going to have to be the kind of person who wants to get some serious work done with the GT76. If you are that kind of person though, I really think the GT76 is just an absolute monster. Like we said, it is very loud. Another change I'd like to see is a slight tweak to the keyboard layout. But if you're considering the GT76, you just want unparalleled performance, and this is definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, the most powerful laptop I have ever tested. So I really think that probably does sum it up quite well. It is not especially practical, like we said, very thick, very heavy, 2 330-watt power bricks. But if you simply want, all-out performance, probably one of the fastest mobile systems you can get, then what can you say about MSI's GT76? It is just an absolute beast. So that has been it, guys. I'm Dominic, Kit Guru. I've been reviewing MSI's GT76 Titan DT9SG. If you like this video, you can give us a thumbs up. You can also leave a comment below. Do let me know what you think about this laptop. I would imagine, the target audience for this thing is pretty small, so most of us can only kind of look on it with just awe and wonder. But if you are kind of the person who wants to pick up something like this, would you consider this MSI laptop? Do let me know your thoughts down below. You can also subscribe if you haven't already. If you like this t-shirt I've been wearing, we have a link down in the description below where you can check out the full range of Kit Guru merch. And lastly, if you want to get some of our content early, as well as get access to exclusive giveaways, we're currently giving away a 240mm liquid cooler, as well as 3 Corsair LL fans, then you can consider backing us on Patreon. Until then though, guys, I'm Dominic, Kit Guru. I will see you in the next video.